For years, Greg Gutfeld has appeared on television as a man who laughs easily, mocks relentlessly, and never seems wounded by criticism. Night after night, he looks unbothered, almost untouchable. But that confidence did not come from safety or success. It was forged through humiliation, rejection, and loss that nearly ended his career before it truly began. To understand Greg Gutfeld today, you have to confront the uncomfortable truth about how close he came to disappearing altogether. The pattern of destruction. Greg Gutfeld's professional life did not begin with triumph. It began with instability. Long before television made him a household name, he was already developing a reputation as someone who could not stay employed, no matter how high he climbed. He was intelligent, fast-talking, and deeply creative, but those qualities came bundled with provocation, chaos, and a refusal to behave the way institutions expected. This pattern would repeat itself for more than a decade. After graduating from the University of California, Berkeley with an English degree, Gutfeld entered the magazine world, a field driven by hierarchy, advertiser pressure, and fragile egos. Early on, he learned how media power worked from the inside, but he also learned how quickly it could turn hostile. At Prevention magazine, colleagues later described his lifestyle as reckless, fueled by heavy drinking and drugs. Work and self-destruction existed side by side, and no one stepped in to slow him down. His rise at Men's Health looked like redemption. By his mid-30s, he had become editor-in-chief of one of the most successful men's magazines in America. On paper, he had everything: a powerful title, industry respect, and national influence. But instead of consolidating power, Gutfeld tested limits. He published content mocking sacred cultural symbols, attacked trends advertisers depended on, and even poked fun at his own management. Internally, executives saw a liability, not a visionary. The fall was swift. He was fired, and the message was unmistakable. Talent was no longer enough. Most people would have adapted after that kind of public failure. Gutfeld did the opposite. At Stuff magazine, he doubled down on provocation. He pushed content further, ignored decorum, and cultivated chaos because it sold. Circulation exploded, but respect evaporated. When he orchestrated a stunt that humiliated the magazine industry itself, the backlash ended his career in American publishing almost overnight. He became radioactive. Editors stopped returning calls. His reputation hardened into something final. What haunted Gutfeld during this period wasn't just unemployment, it was repetition. He kept reaching the top, only to destroy his position the moment he arrived. By his early 40s, he was no longer a promising editor. He was a warning story. And yet, the most painful truth had not arrived yet. That would come when even distance could not save him. Exile, marriage, and the last professional collapse. By the time Greg Gutfeld left the United States, it wasn't ambition driving him anymore. It was survival. After the scandal that ended his run in American publishing, no major magazine would touch him. His name had become shorthand for disruption without restraint. Editors didn't see a risk worth taking. They saw a lawsuit waiting to happen. With his career effectively stalled, Gutfeld did something that felt less like strategy and more like exile. He left the country. London offered distance, not redemption. When he accepted the role of editor-in-chief at the British edition of Maxim, it was less because of renewed faith in him, and more because his reputation hadn't fully crossed the Atlantic yet. For a brief moment, it looked like reinvention was possible. But the underlying pattern hadn't changed. The instincts that had cost him everything before were still intact, and this time, the margin for error was even smaller. It was during this fragile period that Gutfeld met Elena Musa at a company conference in Portugal. She worked in magazine publishing herself, disciplined, private, and uninterested in the chaos that followed him. Gutfeld later described recognizing something immediately, a certainty he hadn't felt before. What's striking is how fast everything else moved after that. Within months, they were married in a quiet civil ceremony, avoiding publicity entirely. For someone whose life had been dominated by professional noise, the silence mattered. But stability at home did not translate into stability at work. Maxim UK struggled under Gutfeld's leadership. Circulation declined. Advertisers grew cautious. The very qualities that had once driven growth now looked like liabilities in a shrinking market. When his contract expired, the company chose not to renew it. There was no dramatic firing this time, just quiet dismissal. He was 41, newly married, unemployed again, and now thousands of miles from the industry that had already rejected him once. The return to New York was sobering. Elena began rebuilding her own career methodically, enrolling in fashion studies and working behind the scenes. Gutfeld had no clear next move. The magazine world was closed to him, and television had never been part of the plan. For the first time, there was no ladder left to climb, only the question of whether his instincts had permanently disqualified him from respectable media. What followed was not a comeback, but a gamble born of desperation. With no safety net and nothing left to protect, Greg Gutfeld was about to take a job that looked like professional humiliation, and that decision would change everything. The time slot designed to fail. When Fox News called Greg Gutfeld, it wasn't with confidence, it was with indifference. The offer was to host a late-night show airing at a time when television executives expected no one to be watching. Originally scheduled even earlier, the program ultimately landed at 3 in the morning, a slot so disregarded that it was treated like a dumping ground. There were no expectations, no pressure, and no real belief that it would last. Gutfeld himself admitted later that he took the job because he was broke and had nothing left to lose. The show launched with almost no preparation. There were no long rehearsals, no careful network grooming, no attempt to sand down his edges. The production environment felt improvised, unstable, and barely professional. Even the crew treated it like a temporary experiment. From the outside, it looked like Fox had given him a final courtesy before letting him fade away quietly. But something unexpected happened in those empty hours of the night. Freed from expectations, Gutfeld did not try to reinvent himself. He leaned into everything that had gotten him fired before. The jokes were sharper, darker, and openly disrespectful. He mocked politicians, celebrities, the media, and even Fox News itself. There was no reverence, no moral lesson, no carefully constructed message. It was messy, chaotic, and often uncomfortable. The network noticed complaints almost immediately. Executives worried the content was too abrasive even for cable news. Their solution wasn't to cancel the show, but to push it even later, assuming fewer viewers would notice. Instead of burying it, that move accidentally defined it. The show became something people discovered rather than something they were marketed. Insomniacs, night shift workers, students, and people tired of polished political theater found it by accident and stayed. What formed was not a mainstream audience, but a loyal one. Viewers didn't tune in because they agreed with everything he said. They tuned in because it felt unscripted, uncontrolled, and real in a way television rarely was. Gutfeld wasn't pretending to be authoritative. He wasn't seeking approval. He was openly enjoying the freedom of being ignored. Behind the scenes, the show slowly stabilized. Familiar collaborators joined him, and the structure became just coherent enough to sustain momentum. Ratings began to rise quietly, without press or celebration. While the rest of the media world slept, a foundation was being built that would later shock the industry. This was not a redemption story yet. It was something stranger. A man the system had discarded finally finding a place where failure no longer mattered. And once that fear disappeared, the version of Greg Gutfeld that emerged was far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Cult fame, a mother's presence, and the hidden cost. As the 3 in the morning experiment quietly survived, Something else began to form around Greg Gutfeld. Loyalty. Not the kind built through marketing or mainstream praise, but a following bonded by tone. The show didn't feel like a product. It felt like a secret. Viewers who stayed with it night after night felt they were watching something unfinished, unstable, and therefore honest. That sense of shared discovery turned casual viewers into committed ones. Behind the irreverence, however, Gutfeld's private world was shrinking. His work consumed nearly all of his attention. The late hours, the pressure to constantly escalate, and the need to remain sharper than everyone else left little room for rest. What steadied him during this period was not professional validation, but family, specifically his mother, Jackie Gutfeld. Jackie was not a distant influence in his life. She had shaped his creativity from childhood, encouraging his imagination without forcing it into structure. As an adult, she remained deeply involved in his professional journey. On air, she became a recurring presence, part joke, part anchor. Viewers saw their relationship not as performance, but as something unfiltered and real. She teased him, challenged him, and supported him without reservation. In an industry built on ego, their dynamic stood out because it wasn't strategic. It was sincere. Off-camera, Greg relied on her more than he admitted publicly. The media world still treated him as a fluke, a temporary irritant rather than a legitimate force. Jackie's approval mattered more than ratings during those years. She represented continuity, someone who believed in him before television ever did. That stability disappeared in 2014 when Jackie Gutfeld died. The loss was not processed on air, but it changed everything. Greg later wrote that losing her felt like losing part of his audience. It wasn't metaphorical. She had been his internal compass. Without her, the humor sharpened, the defensiveness deepened, and the distance between the man and the persona widened. Professionally, his trajectory continued upward. The network recognized his appeal and placed him on a new panel show that aired during daytime hours. Suddenly, he was no longer hidden. He was visible, daily, and influential. But emotionally, the cost of constant provocation began to surface. The laughter remained, but the center that once grounded it was gone. The irony was brutal. Just as Greg Gutfeld became impossible to ignore, the person who had seen him most clearly was no longer there to witness it. Power, backlash, and the moment the industry panicked. Greg Gutfeld's move from the margins into daytime television altered his position overnight. When he became a regular presence on a high-profile panel show, the shield of obscurity vanished. No longer a curiosity airing while America slept, he was now visible to millions, 5 days a week. With that visibility came scrutiny, intense, relentless, and often personal. Critics no longer dismissed him as an accident of late-night chaos. They treated him as a problem that needed to be contained. The response from the media establishment was predictable but unforgiving. Headlines framed him as irresponsible, cruel, and dangerous. Segments were clipped out of context and circulated as proof of moral failure. Calls for advertisers to intervene grew louder. What unsettled critics most was not his politics, but his refusal to perform outrage the way it was expected. He mocked institutions rather than defending positions. He ridiculed language itself. That unpredictability made him difficult to neutralize. Internally, Fox recognized something others did not want to admit. Gutfeld was resonating beyond the network's core audience. Viewers who felt alienated by traditional late-night comedy, now dominated by ideological lectures disguised as jokes, found something different in him. His humor was abrasive, but it was not rehearsed. He attacked both parties when it suited him, even if one side received more fire. The tone felt closer to defiance than instruction. In 2015, the network gave him a new platform, his own weekly show. It was framed as an experiment, not a coronation. Airing on weekends, it kept him outside the traditional late-night battlefield. But the audience followed. Week after week, the numbers grew quietly, without fanfare. While broadcast hosts commanded headlines, Gutfeld accumulated viewers. Then came the decision that changed the late-night landscape. The show was moved to weeknights, placed directly against established giants who had ruled the space for decades. Industry observers predicted collapse. Cable news had never dominated late night. Conservative comedy had never done so either. The assumptions felt safe, until they weren't. Within months, the ratings told a story no one wanted to explain. Greg Gutfeld was winning. Not occasionally, but consistently. The man once treated as unemployable was now outperforming hosts backed by massive budgets and decades of institutional support. The backlash intensified, but it no longer slowed him down. For the first time, the industry wasn't laughing at him. It was watching nervously, unsure how someone they had dismissed for years had rewritten the rules without asking permission. Fatherhood, grief, and the quiet reckoning. At the height of his professional dominance, Greg Gutfeld entered a chapter of life he never expected to reach. In his early 60s, he became a father for the first time. The announcement was delivered with humor, as everything in his public life tends to be. But beneath the jokes was a profound shift. He admitted openly that becoming a parent late in life erased regrets he had carried for decades. The chaos that once defined him finally had a counterweight. The timing was cruel in its own way. His mother, Jackie, never lived to see this chapter. The woman who had shaped his imagination, defended his instincts, and believed in him before anyone else was gone. Gutfeld never framed that loss as tragedy on television, but it lingered beneath the surface. Fatherhood did not replace grief. It reframed it. He became what she had been to him, only without her guidance. Professionally, he no longer had anything to prove. His show dominated its time slot. His voice shaped conversations others reacted to rather than initiated. Yet success did not soften him. If anything, it made him more honest about what failure had taught him. He often said that being fired was the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because it felt good, but because it forced him to stop seeking approval from systems that never wanted him whole. What really happened to Greg Gutfeld is not a story of overnight success or ideological conquest. It is the story of a man repeatedly rejected until rejection stopped frightening him. He did not evolve to fit television. Television bent around him, slowly, reluctantly, and without celebration. So was Greg Gutfeld shaped more by rejection or by resilience? And do you think success means winning approval or surviving long enough to no longer need it? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if this story surprised you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories behind familiar faces.